Hello, and thank you all for joining. My name is Elsie with the Travel and Tourism Research Association. TTRA unites the best and brightest in the travel and tourism industry. We are getting ready for our Marketing Outlook Forum that's right around the corner from January 29th to 31st. If you're looking to register or want to learn more, please check out the website at marketingoutlookforum.com. Welcome to today's webinar, Maximizing Your Data Toolbox, presented by our TTRA partner, Tourism Economics. Vice President for the Americas, Zeke Coleman, and Virginia Tourism's Dan Roberts will be providing the ultimate how-to lesson in organizing and optimizing the various data tools that are at our disposal. Friendly reminder that we are using the Zoom webinar platform, so please drop your questions into the Q&A and we will get to as many of those as we can at the end of the session. Now I will hand this over to Zeke and Dan.
Thanks, Elsie. And thank you all for joining. So I have the distinct privilege of being joined by Dan Roberts. Dan is super smart, and I've gotten a preview of his material, so I won't steal his thunder. But yeah, you're in for a treat, and it's really tactical, really practical. I think he's got some cool key takeaways. So please do prepare to engage and get some questions ready. If you see something of interest, write a note down, drop it in the chat, and I'll be watching that as Dan goes along. But Dan, I'll kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zeke, for that introduction. And we love working with you guys, and thank you for TTRA as well for this opportunity. And we will be at Marketing Outlook Forum as well. Virginia will be there, well represented. So I'll plug that from my end as well. Make sure you all attend. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will go from here too. I assume everybody can see that. Please, just put anything in the chat or just let me know. Great if we have any issues at all. So we're going to talk today about maximizing your data toolbox. This is going to look a little bit different, I think, than a typical data presentation, as Zeke alluded to. We're not going to talk about, insights or an actual, report or any type of finding or anything like that. We're going to talk about data strategy. And we're going to talk about, what is the way that how we work as a research team rather than, necessarily the things that we work on or what we produce. So I've defined here, 5 steps to designing and guiding an overall data strategy. My hope is that any of these steps are applicable to your organization, no matter how large or how small. These are steps that we took and that we've been taking over the past 2 to 3 years as we've defined our research and data roadmap, for our stakeholders here at Virginia Tourism. So first, this process kicks off with cataloging your data and research tools using a products and services framework. So I'm going to define what a product and service framework is and why it's relevant to what we do every day. Next, the next step in the roadmap is to map your stakeholder audiences and their needs. This kind of goes hand in glove with part number 1 above. Third, I'm going to talk about developing your research roadmap. So this would actually be putting points number 1 and 2 together and actually defining where do you want to go and how do you want to evolve as a team. Fourth, I'm going to talk about driving efficiencies and automating repeated tasks wherever you can. This isn't pursuing automation for automation's sake, but this is more about prioritization of what you're accountable for, making sure that you can, continually put yourself in a position to answer questions and to help your broader team. Lastly, I'm going to talk about how do you go out and identify new data sets and how do you build onto the data that you already have access to, and I'll give you a couple pointers for that as well. So diving right into point number 1, really the first process here that we've defined to building an overall data strategy is cataloging and brainstorming your data and research tools using a product and services framework. So over here on the left, I've developed a simple product and service framework. And really, this is super relevant for our organization at VTC because us being at the state level, we have accountability both upwards and downwards as well. So upwards to our executive team, upwards to our governor, and to our Secretary of Commerce and Trade, but also downwards to our broader tourism industry and to our, our 133 localities too. So on the left here, I have, defined what data products are. And products are data, tools are reports that are being pushed out primarily. And then on the right here, I've defined data services. So services are what we do kind of as with our expertise. That's providing data, interpretation, analysis, and insight. And why you want to differentiate between the two of these is because they each have a different optimization, guideline as to what you're pursuing here. So on the left side with products, you want to optimize for client service. You want to optimize for building trust with your audiences, and then distribution and sharing. So are the products that you're pushing out optimized to be distributed and shared, and can they even be shared? And then you want to optimize for scalability as well. So really what this is about if you have data tools that you're pushing out or reports, you want to think about those tools as products, not necessarily just as the data themselves. So are they in a position where they're building trust with your broader client base? Are they in a position where your consumers of those tools can actually use them and apply them to what they do? On the right-hand side on services, really that's optimizing around identification, measurement, and alignment to your organization's broader goals, and also for innovation. So this, your tools aren't really going to live in one bucket or the other. There's often things that are going to straddle both of these buckets as well. But generally, we find this framework helpful to differentiate between what you do, what you push out, and what are you helping your internal team with. And from what we invest our time in here at Virginia Tourism, I can say that we spend roughly 50% of our time on each bucket as well. So this format really works for us. If you are a larger state than us, you might find that you actually over-index more on the product side. You have to push out more data because maybe the center of gravity is more with your local DMOs. If you're a smaller organization, you might need to invest more time in the services side of this as well. So making sure that you're positioning research as a strategic engine for your broader organization. And really just kind of reiterating why this framework is necessary is that, if you're able to segment the different tools that you have access to and what you would like to have access to into a product or a service, this is going to help clarify the value proposition of your research team to the rest of your organization. This is going to help tie your products and services to your organization's broader strategic goals. And it's also going to identify areas of expertise that you have on your team, as well as areas of opportunity or gaps that you currently aren't fulfilling. Lastly, and probably most importantly as well, being able to segment your tools into this product and services framework is going to allow you to prioritize everything that you do. And as we talk about a data strategy throughout this presentation, prioritization is going to be a common theme. So if we are successful in building a data strategy and standing up a research team, you're going to get busier. You're going to be more in demand. So ultimately, having to prioritize and continually evaluate what you're pushing out is a fundamental requirement of any data and research team going forward too. So next, I've kind of already talked about how positioning your tools into like a product and services framework is going to allow you to match those to different audiences. So the second step in our overall roadmap here is to chart and map your stakeholders. And at Virginia Tourism, as I've alluded to a little bit earlier, we have three broad groups of stakeholders. So on the top here, we have our external executive audience. So this would include governmental leadership. So this might be our Secretary in Commerce and Trade, which is the secretariat that we sit within Virginia Tourism. This might include the governor. This might include other members of the governor's administration. And this can also include other government stakeholders, such as personnel on the congressional committees that we work with, other members of the House of Delegates, and so on and so forth. Next, we have our internal Virginia Tourism audience. So this would include my peers on the executive team, such as the VP of Marketing and the VP of Destination Development, as well as our CEO, Rita. But this would also include our marketing team and our partnership marketing and destination development team. And lastly, we have our industry audience. So we have 133 localities in Virginia. I don't think we're the top state in number of counties. I think that belongs to Texas, but we do have quite a number of counties in independent cities, and we have over 100 DMOs that work with those localities. Some of those DMOs are very large and represent multiple jurisdictions. Some of them represent very large metropolitan areas, and they have budgets of many millions of dollars. And others, they might just be one county or a town DMO, and they might only be a visitor center as well. So we have to represent that entire audience through everything that we do. And lastly, as part of this industry audience, we also have our broader travel industry. So this would include hotels, maybe it's individual properties or management companies or developers, We have attractions, maybe that's Colonial Williamsburg or Busch Gardens. We also have other parallel industries such as our restaurant group. This could include our Restaurant Lodging Association and other interest groups as well, maybe outdoor recreation groups too. So charting and mapping your stakeholders, vital importance here. And this is important because it allows you to chart out the different requirements that each of these groups have. And so for the industry audience here, what they're really looking for is local, precise data. They want data that is going to be understandable at their level of jurisdiction. You know, if I'm an individual county and I'm only able to get data at the statewide level or at the regional data, that's not at the regional level, that's not going to be super applicable to me as well. What this industry audience is also looking for is empowerment. They want to be able to understand and trust the data that you are providing them so that they can then take that data and put it in front of their stakeholders. Other things that they're looking for is assistance with interpretation of that data. You know, you might provide them something, but they may need a little bit of handholding to understand what that's telling them as well. Another thing that they might be looking for is context. So if I provide somebody a data point such as their visitor spending level, they might be looking for context around whether that's a good number or a bad number and what is it telling them. So that's something that as we adopt a product mentality, that's something that we have to embed in them in that as we're pushing data out. This industry audience, as I alluded to on the previous slide as well, is going to be more product oriented. So these are going to be your audiences that are consuming what you're pushing out as an organization. And as a result, because you're pushing data out routinely to these groups, this is a great candidate for automation as well. And I'll go into that a little bit later when we talk about automating data. In the middle here, we have our executive audience. So what this group is really looking for is the instant availability of data. And that's because their questions are often unpredictable. So what we find with this group is that, you know, we treat them both from a product and a service perspective. That's because we provide this group reporting on a weekly and monthly basis, but that often raises additional questions as well. So even though we treat them as a product group where we're pushing out data and insights to them, that oftentimes raises additional questions. And we just want to make sure that our data is in a position that we can turn it around and answer questions quickly. And at least the reporting side of this audience is an excellent candidate for automation as well. And then lastly, we have the internal audience. So, you know, alluding to the previous slide as well, this again is our marketing team and our partnership marketing team. Our partnership marketing team is our destination development team, and that team actually lives out in the markets within the state as well. They're not all placed in Richmond. So this is a team that lives in the with the industry and, you know, represents them as well. So I would consider them as part of this audience as well. And really what this group is looking for is, because they're the key strategy setting audience for our organization, they're looking for deep insight and understanding of the why. So they want to be able to action upon what you're providing them, and they're going to be more service oriented as a result. And this is where we really want to free up a lot of time as a team to invest most of our time on deep research work so that we can push the overall organization forward from a research perspective. Also, you know, as I mentioned on the previous slide, you know, not everything has to fit neatly into a product or a service bucket. You can have tools over here that service your internal audience, such as a marketing team. But once you identify something that works here, you can turn around and pivot it into a product that you can then push out to the rest of your industry once you've prototyped it internally as a team. So, you know, as you guys will notice at the bottom of this slide, you know, the industry audience is more product oriented. So really what we're doing over there is about pushing material out and making sure we're building trust with that audience and that we're building new audience members over there on the left. But on the right, it's much more of a service oriented play over here. So really making sure that we're building connections with these teams, that they trust us, and that we're there to be able to answer questions, and that we have the tools that are able to answer their questions as well. And again, this is just our view, sitting here, you know, at a state tourism office of a you know, middle to kind of larger state. If you're a larger state than us, your portfolio might look a lot more product oriented just because of the nature of your business. And then if you're a smaller DMO, your portfolio might look a lot more service oriented as well too. So just as an example for this, I'm going to kind of take you guys through an example of a product that's tailor-made for our industry audience. So this is our economic impact reporting. We produce this once a year, and we do this by county as well. And this is a little bit tough to look at. And, I understand that completely. I love spreadsheets. I think many of us on this call probably do if you're a member of TTRA. But unfortunately, this is hard for somebody who doesn't live in the spreadsheet world to understand. And our locality level economic impact reporting is oftentimes the most important data point that we provide for our local DMOs and for our counties. And oftentimes, this is the only thing that our counties really rely upon. So is this the best format for a data product that's meant for that external audience? Probably not. What we're doing with this report is we're presenting it without any context. We're forcing a manual process as well for the user to have to pull what they need out of this data. And the reason why that's a big sticking point here is especially for the jurisdictions that I've highlighted. So one of our local DMOs is Richmond Region Tourism, and that DMO makes up 7 localities. And so what we're making somebody do, well, Richmond specifically, with this Excel sheet, is they have to go up through here and total up all 7 of their jurisdictions. And that can create errors. They can mistype that depending on how they're pulling the information down. I'm not worried about that at all, with some of our groups, but for folks that don't live in the economic impact world and they don't work with data every day, we're asking a lot of them to be able to do this and to be able to pull information from a spreadsheet in a raw format. So really, when I talk about adopting a product mentality for an external audience, what we're really talking about is this right. So because of Symphony and because of a Tableau dashboard, and being able to visualize this in a way that makes sense for somebody that doesn't work with data every day, we're basically taking the same data here and now putting it in a one-pager. So in this format, I've totaled together the 7 localities that make up Richmond Region Tourism, starting with Chesterfield County, Colonial Heights, Hanover, and that includes Richmond and Henrico County as well. And I've highlighted that in the upper left-hand corner. But what I love about this format is that it's instantly drawn your attention to what's important. And it's providing context to be able to begin interpreting the data as well. On this format, there's no interpretation really, except for some of these percentages. Really hard to understand if you don't live in this world every day. But on this format right here, because of these icons at the top, I instantly know what I should be paying attention to. So boom, right there at the top, we have $3.5 billion in total visitor spending, and that's up 22% year over year. That's a headline figure that I can take from this report. Moving over to the middle bucket right here, 7% of all jobs in this area are sustained by tourism. That is great context for the recipient of this report to begin to be able to relate it to other outside concepts as well. $261 million in state and local revenues. Again, able to take what the main idea is from that spreadsheet and actually bringing that up and bubbling it to the top. And then over here on the right, we have the chart, the bubble chart, just showing what the relative share of these different sectors are. So if I'm in Richmond Region Tourism and I'm looking at this bubble chart, this resonates instantly with me because I know that my DMO does a lot in the culinary and the food and beverage and the restaurant space, but also we have a large airport within our jurisdiction as well. So hence the food and beverage and the transportation buckets bubbling to the top. So again, we're drawing people's attention immediately to what we want to draw their attention to. And then on the bottom right hand here, a big question has been performance relative to 2019. We have that immediately available here as well. So again, just a more user-friendly format rather than having to look at a spreadsheet and force a lot of that action upon the user. When we adopt a product mentality for what we're pushing out, we can begin to do things like this as well. So, as a team, I think this is the thing that we push out more than anything else, more than any question that we get. And even if people aren't asking for it directly, if somebody in one of these localities, maybe they have a question for us about outdoor recreation in a certain county, we will pull one of these anyway, just to be able to build that trust because we want to develop that person as a client because we've adopted a product mentality over that group as well. So that kind of wraps up, the first 2 points. So I've talked about adopting a product and service mentality, and secondly, about defining your audiences. Next, we're going to start actually road mapping as well. So the third step on our 5-step process is developing your research roadmap. And really what this is about is answering questions around where does your organization need you to go as a research team? And do you have the right mix of products and services for your audiences? And so we did this about 2.5 years ago. We had an all-staff retreat where we kind of, reintroduced the research team to the rest of the organization and said, here's what we're going to be focusing on going forward. And, when we scoured the internet, we came up with this, we found this maturity model for a data organization on towardsdatascience.com. And if you guys aren't familiar with that blog, that's a really kind of technical blog for people that are in the data science and data analytics world. And, you'll notice there's a lot of buzzwords on this maturity model. Like on the right-hand side there, you see AI and machine learning is real, things like that. We're not pretending to do any of that type of work here. We're not pretending to be data scientists or anything like that. But there's a couple of best practices that we found on this maturity model that really, really resonated with us that we could then take to the rest of the organization. And for us, because we had taken the previous two steps on understanding, what our product and services were, and then defining our audiences, our roadmap, rather than kind of having to go out and identify new data sets and things like that, our roadmap was around more how do we work with the rest of the organization, which is why this maturity model really spoke to us. So I've circled a couple of things on here. If you notice under data tells a story, data storytelling was a huge thing that the rest of the team had asked, when I first joined the team, that we do more of that. So really, I've circled the pieces of that resonate here with us. So, being able to have answers that are glanceable to simplify employee processes, that's speaking immediately to what we did on this slide here, just having answers available in one shot. Being able to bring different data sets together, merging data from different sources, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But then also, very importantly, having a consistent view of information around the organization, both up and down and laterally too. Moving over to that number 4 right there with emerging intelligence, making sure that data is crossing silos. So does everybody throughout the organization have the same consistent, are they receiving consistent information across the board? And then on the right-hand side here on the transformed organization piece, really having employees focused on high value work and then automating low value work too. So really this spoke to us because, as I mentioned earlier, if we're going to be building new audiences, if we're going to be doing more things with our research team, you're going to be more in demand. So we're going to have to figure out a way to prioritize, what we have access to and automate that as well too. So, once we kind of looked at this maturity model, the 4 things that really stuck out to us for our research roadmap going forward were, firstly, getting data in the hands of those that need it across the entire organization, and especially those that are client facing. So as I mentioned, one of the hallmarks of our organization is having a destination development team that actually lives out throughout the Commonwealth too. So they, work day in, day out with the local DMOs, and they're represented kind of throughout the different markets of the state. We have one person in the Shenandoah Valley, one person in the Blue Ridge Highlands down around, Virginia Tech and Blacksburg and down that way. We have somebody in Southern Virginia. We have somebody in Hampton Roads as well. But those folks are the first point of contact, and so we really need to make sure that the entire organization, especially those people, have access to data pulls like this here that I showed you on the previous slide. So just to kind of back up, our whole destination development team has access to everything within Symphony. It's not just a research thing. It's something that anybody in the organization can go and pull because they're working day in, day out with our industry partners in the field. Second, we wanted to build audience for our products and lower barriers to entry to research both inside and outside the organization. Third, we wanted cross-departmental alignment around common ideas and insights that impact the entire team. So a great example of this is about 2 years ago, we did an image study and we did a couple of things around identifying our target audience as well. And rather than just impacting the marketing team, we made sure that the entire organization was aware of what the results were of that image study, as well as, we're familiar and understanding of who our target audience was as well. So, that's something that, those concepts impact everybody throughout the organization, and they need to be able to speak to that as well. So that's why a key pillar of what our team does every day is cross-departmental alignment. And then lastly, I've talked about this a couple times already, but automation of repetitive work. And that's because we want to maximize the time available for insight generation. We also want to maximize the products that we are able to push out to the rest of the organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about automation, and specifically how you would do this for a product-oriented audience. So for product-oriented audiences, You should be able to identify where you can automate different tasks, especially if you are producing them on a periodic basis. So weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, whatever the frequency might be. And you don't have to be an expert, and you don't honestly have to subscribe to a big fancy tool to be able to invest in a little bit of automation. What we're really looking for here is continuous improvement that saves a little bit of time. So for example, we did this 3-step process with our lodging reporting. So, before we subscribed to weekly data, we were only pushing out monthly STR data. And that was a manual data entry process. So we were taking data from the STR reports, and we were actually manually keying that in to an Excel spreadsheet. And that's just like really not a great process because, it's very error prone. You're investing a lot of time in it, and then you can't scale that. So if you want to add more data, or in our case, we wanted to also add weekly STR reporting, kind of right as we were leaving the pandemic, you can't scale that. So now that process would be repeated, instead of being 1 or 2 hours a month, that's 1 or 2 hours every week that you can't get back. So what we did is we redesigned that report using Excel formulas. So it took a process that was, an hour plus and made it into a 5-minute process, just using Excel formulas. And with that, we were able to restage, the format of the STR reporting into a more appealing and visual format as well. So that saved us a massive amount of time, and we were able to scale that, from the monthly reporting into the weekly reporting as well. But lastly, we have like the best case scenario here with enhanced automation. So now with Symphony, we have a database and a dashboard solution where we can do custom lookups and custom visualizations as well. So we're even more time, and especially thinking about that executive audience, we have a toolkit now that's responsive to questions that we might get that come in the door. We can quickly filter and get to what we need to get to very quickly. So just to kind of walk you guys through an example of what that looks like, this is our semi-automated Excel report now for weekly data. And what Pratiksha, our senior research manager, does is she basically just takes our STR report and she dumps it into some hidden tabs on here. And then we use formulas to pick up all that data and bring it into this format. And this format also, if you guys are familiar with the format that STR data comes in, we subscribe to a lot of markets, right? And that data was it was spread out over 3 different tabs. There's one tab for occupancy and one tab for ADR and then one tab for RevPAR, but only for the first 20 markets. And then you get to the next 20 and there's another tab for occupancy and another tab for ADR. And it just got really voluminous and kind of hard to compare markets against one another. So we reformatted that into a format that makes sense and that is a lot more easier to understand for us. So this is just an example, but I would really encourage you all, for anything that you're pulling from a report or a system where the format is always going to be the same, no matter what you receive it, whether it's weekly, monthly, annual, whatever, take the one time to set up like a semi-automated process up front. So then you can just have that repeat going on forever and ever, where all you might have to do is update that if the format of the report changes. So we don't just do this for lodging report. We also have, we work with Longwoods for visitor profiles. We also have some Excel formats that, take the data that we get from the Longwoods portal and then reformat it in a way that we can share it. We do this as well with labor market data that we get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We've set up data polls from FRED, the St. Louis Federal Reserve Economic Database, where we can automate those polls and then reformat them into a segment or into a format that makes sense for us. So, that's a little bit of an upfront time investment, but it's something we can repeat over and over and over again, that you only have to do once. So even if it is kind of manual, it just cuts down on a lot of time that frees up a lot more time for analysis and for other things as well, too. So, and this is the best case scenario here. So this is kind of the end stage of where we're at. Now, because we have our lodging data feeding into Symphony, we have queryable data and dashboards that we can pull for any audience. So we have this weekly report over here on the left that we can filter by any one of our markets, and we can filter that by dates as well. So if we get a question around, what happened on a certain weekend, we can go in here and filter that report for that weekend and look at like the event, the impact of a festival or a football game or a one-time event like that. And then on the right-hand side here, we have trending views too. So this is a great view for like an executive audience because they know immediately where we're at. So this is meant to provide quick, where are we answers. And this is also filterable by market as well. And we have the monthly and the weekly side by side, which is super helpful for us. And then in the bottom, this is actually probably my favorite piece of it here, even though it's the least visually appealing. And that's because now we just simply have a database, right? So I can go in here and I can customize what I need this poll to look like. And then I can drop this into any PowerPoint or any format that I might need to share externally. So I live in that format. We pull stuff all the time to be able to build presentations and things like that. And, that's super important for us just to have a one single source of the truth where we don't have to stitch together Excel spreadsheets and things like that. Because if we miss a week, we miss a week and now we have to go back and do all that over again too. So really what this is all about is, again, prioritization, optimization, for that product oriented audience member as well, for an external audience member too. So lastly, I'm going to get a little esoteric here and talk about data that complements other data and kind of how you should look about adding different data sets to what you have access to already. So really kind of thinking about data theoretically, all data really consists of is observations and attributes. So if you were to think about like a spreadsheet, your observations would basically be your rows and your attributes are your columns. So your observations are your unit of analyses. So this could be, if you're working with a survey, this could be respondents that took that survey. If you're working with mobile location data, this could be devices. If you're working with performance data like lodging data or economic impact data, this could be markets or geographies, or it could even be units of time, such as days, months, or years. So on the right-hand side here, this is attributes. Your columns are what you know about your units of analysis. So this is really where I think the explanatory power of data lives. And really the best data sets are the ones that you can join or compare to others to unlock additional explanatory power. And you can use this as a very hard principle. Like, there's data sets that you can join together, using code or using Excel, to be able to add on to the explanatory power of data sets. Or you can do this as kind of like a soft concept as well, to where if you have two data sets that are looking at the same unit of analysis, you can cross compare them to come up with additional explanatory power of whatever that unit of analysis might be too. So just using lodging reporting as an example, let's say that I'm looking at a data set of Northern Virginia hotel performance by month. And I have my observations, and that might be the months, and my attributes are, OC, ADR, RevPAR, supply, demand, and revenue for that data set. We can expand that in two different directions. So I can add attributes to that data set. So maybe I add short-term rental data, such as performance by month, to that data set. And maybe I can add additional observations, like maybe I have a forecast over how that market is expected to perform going forward, and I have that by month. So I can append those two things to my original data set of Northern Virginia hotel performance by month, and I can come up with a more complete picture of what Northern Virginia performance looks like, right? And this is just a model. Again, you can do this with any data set. This is even possible with things like mobile location data. So if I have mobile location data, I can add attributes onto that data, such as where people came from, or maybe I can add some demographic data to understand who they are as well, to come up with, again, additional explanatory power over what that data set is. And lastly, kind of the important takeaway here as well is find ways to add context and assess what your complete picture looks like with additional data sets. So now I have, let's say I end up with in the middle here, this complete picture of what Northern Virginia performance looks like. But, I don't understand if that's good or bad or not. So what do I do as a result of that? Well, I can go out and purchase STR's top 25 markets, or I can look at comparable markets for Northern Virginia. One of those might be, Montgomery County, Maryland. That's an area outside of DC that has a similar sort of makeup to Northern Virginia. It's very suburban. So maybe I look at that market as well to be able to compare that and understand the trajectory of my Northern Virginia market. But generally, this is a very simple model, just applicable to one market here in this case. But this is a very simple model that you can apply to whatever data set that you might be looking at. Instead of going out and always just looking to acquire new data, maybe you can get more out of the existing data that you have by identifying additional attributes to that data and other context so that you can better explain it and, build ambassadors out of that data too. So really, I've already mentioned all this, but when you're looking at new data sets, you want to ask yourself, is the data that I'm looking at to bring into, my existing toolkit, is it at the same unit of analysis as what my existing data is? Are all my geographies drawn in the same way? Am I looking at the same time period? Do they share something in common so I can draw that connection? Second, you want to make sure that your data set has new attributes that complement and enhance your existing data. Next, if the data doesn't meet those requirements, so if it doesn't help explain other data, does it have explanatory power on its own? Is it helping you answer a key business question that you have? And then lastly, would a dashboard or data solution help me get a handle on new data too? So oftentimes, a lot of the data that we're beginning to deal with is going to be large and it's going to be voluminous. It's a little bit beyond our capabilities. We don't have a database that we can work with here. We don't have a data team. So the things that we want to be able to work with, we have to be able to handle them. And that's where Symphony has been a huge help for us, but also just making sure we have good data management practices over everything that we work on as well, too. So just kind of recapping, 5 steps that we've talked through at a high level. Again, not every step might be applicable to your organization. And honestly, you could probably take them in any order, but this is just what we found super helpful is a quick 5-step process, no matter what maturity, you're at as a data organization as well. So I'll kick it there. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I think we'd be happy to take your questions.
Excellent. So Dan, we got this question. How do you address data sharing restrictions like STRs, TNCs when talking to external audiences?
Sure. So I would say we are pretty conservative on what we're able to do with. That's a great question, and I know STR is very specific about that as well. So if you go to our lodging data on our website, you will notice that all that we prepare and present is just what we're able to present and prepare from our contract as well. So we adhere specifically to our republishing requirements from STR, and that's just kind of the world that we live in. Oftentimes, if we do get a question about past performance, which we do get frequently, what we'll do is we'll provide broader context. We might say like, hey, your occupancy in 2019 was more in the 55 to 60% range. So that, we're providing commentary around that data, but we're not republishing that data in a way that's a violation of our agreement as well. So that's something that, and I will periodically check in with STR as well to make sure that how we're publishing our data is sufficient for, the restrictions that they put in place.
That's great. I thought it was interesting. You mentioned clients. Can you talk a bit about that? Like, it's almost like you view whether obviously at a state, maybe a destination would say, well, that's different. You're a state, you have all these stakeholders. But can you just talk about how you guys think through that? That's fascinating to me. Clients, products, services, just quickly.
Yeah. And then, honestly, that's how the rest of our organization thinks as well. So we don't have, our audience, of course, is primarily the consumer. So with our brand marketing and things like that, and our efforts to get the visitor to come to Virginia and to, for them to know what we want them to know about Virginia as well. But, we are, at the end of the day, like we are the governmental representative of this huge industry, of a $30 billion industry, right? So we have stakeholders and clients throughout that we need their help to kind of amplify what we do every day. But we also, we need their support as well, because that $30 billion all depends upon them too. So, I think just thinking about it as a client, it just helps you, it gives you a sense of where to go as well. Treating somebody like a client, then you start to kind of think about best practices like, value and long-term, longevity around relationships and things like that. So it becomes less about the data and, and then applying a client-centric mindset, it becomes more about what we're doing with the data and making sure that we're meeting people's expectations with that data as well.
One of the things I thought fascinating too, I don't see any other questions, but if you guys have questions, throw them or I'll ask mine. With the executive audience, you mentioned automation is very helpful. Any worries that you might automate a report or send it out and they misinterpret it and it create more questions that you want to avoid, or how do you mitigate that? Do you walk through it with them and say, how do you want to see this? Like, how do you approach that?
So we automate and present what we feel best equipped that we can answer questions about too. So like something like lodging reporting is like our governor, that actually goes to our governor every week. Like, we send a weekly report that kind of goes up the chain through our secretary, to the governor's desk, and they kind of get a report on what every agency is doing too. So they love data that just indicates how different parts of the Commonwealth are doing. So that's why that lodging data is so great. For just understanding kind of the health of the different parts of the state. And we don't publish things, like we don't just push something out if we're not ready to answer questions about it. But for something that's more strategic in nature, so like our campaign performance, or like yeah, things like that. That would be a perfect example of that, where we've attached a lot of strategic value to our marketing campaign. That's something where we actually want to have a meeting with them. We're not just going to push that data out. We're going to have them come and we're going to walk them through a whole storytelling exercise rather than kind of just pushing out the report directly from the vendor as well.
Here's a good question just came in. That was a great answer. Jonathan Lee says, if you have a new data set you're looking at that doesn't perfectly match up with your existing units of analysis, how do you weigh if it's worth acquiring that data set and doing the work to reconcile it with your existing data, or educate your clients on the differences in the data? Great question. And I think I had one like it. And then he says, what tips would you have for getting around any misunderstanding on somewhat similar but different data that tells slightly different stories due to different definitions?
Sure. So I think that's a great question, and it all kind of starts with the upfront due diligence process as well. I would encourage everybody that's looking at new data, and this is even kind of aside from like what value does it serve, but try to get a demo of what that data looks like in its most raw format as possible as well. So don't just, it's not just about the sales pitch. It's not just about the presentation and kind of like what the vendor says it can do. You want to actually be able to look at, if possible, and again, huge asterisk, maybe another client's data, if it, or if that client is okay with them sharing that, or you want to look at data in a demo format. So we've oftentimes asked for, hey, do you have a data set that's specifically designed for demos? If you're not able to share other client work, and I totally understand when that's not available to be shared. So that's really, it all starts with kind of really great vetting up front, where we want to get our hands in the data before we even purchase it, just so that we can make sure that we understand some of the nuance that's there with it. And then kind of around shepherding, the question was more to how do we shepherd that, once it's come in the door too. Really, that's where we have to make ourselves available from a service provider point of view, that we are able to answer any questions and kind of take care of any concerns about that data. Really, that's, if we've done our job in pushing the product out and building trust with that product, maybe even with something totally unrelated, that opens the door now to a conversation where we want somebody, if they have a question, to just feel like we have an open door that they can ask about. So that's why we just really, I think that's where that product and service mentality really just comes through again, is that, when we push, like if we're pushing out a new data set, if we've done our job with our other data sets that we push out, like we've already built that bridge with that client base and we've built that trust with them. So they feel comfortable where there's not that barrier or there's that wall where they can come and ask us questions about that data. So maybe even if, maybe we built a great relationship with somebody through lodging data or through our economic impact data, and now, we just actually spun out a whole new program around bringing mobile location data to the broader industry. So building that trust initially with other things that we do is paramount to be able to continue to expand, what we do with other products as well.
That's great. A similar question that I just had was, what are some of the nuances to keep in mind when buying data with the intent of joining them together? So thing that I have in mind is because I just always wanted to do this at Visit Savannah. If I wanted to join credit card data and mobile location data, or credit card and, booking attribution data or whatever, I don't know. Yeah, just what are your thoughts on that? Like, are there any risks or things to look out for? Any reason you wouldn't want to do that? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
So you would really just want to understand where that data comes from. So that's where, like, during that due diligence process, aside from looking at data in that raw format, if possible, you want to be able to you really want to understand kind of what is the source that's propelling that data. Like if it's mobile location data, what types of apps is it coming from? Like what types of providers is it coming from? And then what is the format of that data so that it even might be joinable or not? The mobile location data that we receive has a ton of geographic origin market parameter or values within it, and those are the values that we're able to take and then join to other data sets as well.
Nice. All right. Any other questions coming in? I don't want to hog the mic, so to speak. I don't see any. Well, one question I had is regarding audiences. What are some mistakes you could make in your data strategy for each? So it may be just the inverse of what you recommended, but like maybe, like Dan's top don't do this list. Is there such thing? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here because we didn't prepare for that.
That's a great question. Honestly, you just don't, you want to provide, like, one thing that we do is we provide like how-to documents and explainers for everything. The other thing that we would do before we push out anything is make sure that the entire team knows that it's going out the door as well. The worst thing that we could do is push out something and then, just push it out with no guardrails attached whatsoever, and then not prep our team, because the first people that get questions on that data aren't actually going to be us. It's going to be the destination development team as well. So we want to make sure that we've already built, they've had a seat at the table this entire time before we push things out the door. So that then when they get the question, they can turn around and reinforce the messaging that we already laid. So when we do our economic reporting every year, our economic impact reporting, I mean, we produce like a 3 or 4 page messaging guideline, and there's a lot of detail in there around like different regions of the state, what they did and where the data comes from. And just, because we are oftentimes not the first point of response for questions, the broader team is. And that's why, kind of backing up to what our overall roadmap looked like when I presented the maturity model, that's why we just, as an organization, really our value is on so much on providing, on breaking down those barriers, right? Because we have to have that alignment across the team. It's about, breaking down silos. The worst thing that we could do, I think, as a research organization is just push data out and not have the whole team there along for the ride as well, because oftentimes there's just questions that are flowing around, that we're not even privy to as well. So that would be number one. For me personally, on my do not do list would be push something out, nobody else knows about it, and it just kind of lives out there in the ether.
I think we're running up on time. So I'm going to ask you one more question. It's kind of again, you don't know that I'm asking this. What's Dan's like sort of wish list item? And so this is, you don't even think this is going to happen. Maybe it'll never happen in tourism, but this is like pie in the sky, perfect world. Maybe it's that fifth bucket where there's AI, machine learning, and some sort of crazy automation. But like, what's your, like, man, this is the next step that I would love, that would be awesome for tourism research, data toolbox kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. I think having first party data for our industry would be amazing. And that's, I mean, we are marketing an entire state, right? So like what is first party data for an entire state? Like the closest we've gotten to that is probably mobile location data or like ADARA data, right? But those are things that they're just giving you part of the process rather than, it's giving you part of the process rather than the entire chain, from attribution all the way through behavior in market and things like that. So total first party data all the way through would be wonderful. And just to kind of give you an example of what this would look like, prior to being in the DMO world, I was in the hotel space. And so I worked on a data analytics team where we called it the business intelligence group, and it was called BIG for short. But that team was kind of placed centrally as its own department to answer questions throughout the whole organization, whether they came from revenue management or marketing or loyalty or whatever. But we all had access to like STR performance data, channel data, data on customers by property. So I could basically, if I noticed a weird thing in like San Antonio, I could look at what are the properties in San Antonio, Then I could look at what is the consumer behavior at those properties in San Antonio? Like, are they high loyalty customers or low loyalty customers? Did they come from brand.com or from a third party OTA? Then I could look at other things along the whole chain. So just understanding, like having everything in one place, but not from like a database perspective, but literally from, understanding how data moves throughout the whole industry. I just think, at one level would be incredible. And I think you would probably say the same thing. So
I would too, yeah. I was gonna say Dan wants microchips for tourism in people. No, I'm just saying, like, it's a one question slipped in. I do think it's worth mentioning, and it's TTRA. I feel like the culture of TTRA is like very familial, and so I'm gonna go over just a little bit. Jonathan says, when acquiring data sets or setting a strategy, how can we be mindful of any bias in what we're gathering? Any tips for auditing if data sets are representative of what's actually happening in the markets we're measuring?
sure. I think that's just where you have to be, like you have to develop your expertise and kind of what the different data sets that you have access to are telling you, right? And so like, and I'll answer this in two parts. On the first half, again, that's where that upfront due diligence part comes in. But you're only able to know what you know from the vendors, right? The vendor's only going to tell you so much around that bias and things like that. Secondly, this is where you really want multiple data sets sometimes, if you can afford them or if they're an option telling you the same thing, right? Like, the different mobile location data dividers or data providers are going to send you, they're going to source their data from different places. So it might help to have data in that format from two different places if it's affordable or if that's even a luxury that you have. But also, like, this is where you can also take a huge step back and just understand the different signals of what everything is telling you as well. So like, I recently saw a survey that said like, business travel intentions were down, double-digit percentages among business travelers recently. And if that was really the case, like our hotel data in our business-centric markets also would have been down, so like there's biases in that survey data that I don't feel like was borne out in the actual like hotel data that we had as well. So that's where you just really want to be able to compare, in that case, I'm taking something that aren't even relatable, right? I'm taking survey data and hotel data, but I'm understanding what the survey data is telling me, and I know my hotel data in a way and enough that I can look at what are the business-centric markets. And because we have, weekly hotel data, I can look at the business travel nights specifically, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and understand, does that show any weakness at all either? So really, that's just, kind of three pieces there, right? The due diligence again, but you're only going to get so much out of that. The second piece is try to triangulate as much as possible. But that third piece is just that applying that expertise lens as well, taking a big step back and just understanding if certain things that you're looking at are borne out in reality as well.
There's also, I'll plug a project that Whitney of North Carolina, NC State is working on with that very thing in mind, with helping you to vet sources to understand what are they good at, what can they do, maybe what they can't do or aren't as good at doing, and how to vet those sources. So I definitely would recommend checking that out. I do believe it's out, or at least it's coming soon. Definitely would be at MOF, so be sure to check that out.
Perfect.
Dan, this is a masterclass, my man. This is awesome. I was taking a ton of notes. I have more questions I'm going to ask you on the side because this is cool, and definitely this is stage worthy. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Dan, for sharing your expertise.
Absolutely. Thank you happy to help. And we'll be at MOF as well. So happy to just network with you guys. Can't wait. So see you all there.